10. St. Stephen's Anglican Church and Cemetery, Newtown. Consecrated in 1845, St. Stephen's Church was a vital part of the burgeoning colonial community. Unlike many churches that simply served a parish, St. Stephen's became a final resting place for many of Sydney's most notable citizens, a who's who of the 19th century elite. The church and its extensive cemetery were a hub of social and spiritual life. But this high-status burial ground would soon become the source of a profound and enduring tragedy. The pivotal moment in the church's history, and the genesis of its haunting, occurred in the 1970s. The cemetery was deemed a public health concern and an obstacle to urban development. In a controversial and ethically questionable decision, the bodies of over 3,000 people were exhumed and reinterred at a new cemetery in Botany. This massive disturbance of the dead, done without the reverence or care they deserved, seems to have had a catastrophic spiritual consequence. The desecration stirred up the souls who were meant to rest, leaving them with no true peace and no proper home. The hauntings at St. Stephen's are primarily centered on the church itself and the small patch of grass where the cemetery once stood. The most famous and commonly reported entity is a male apparition known simply as the Gentleman Ghost. He is often seen late at night, a translucent figure in a top hat and coat, walking along the former pathways of the cemetery, his face etched with a look of profound despair. He is thought to be a high-ranking official or notable citizen whose eternal rest was so rudely interrupted. However, the activity can be much more personal and terrifying. Visitors have reported a distinct feeling of being watched and followed as they walk around the church. There are countless reports of disembodied whispers and the sound of muffled footsteps on the gravel where the tombstones once stood. Perhaps most chillingly, paranormal investigators have captured EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, that sound like angry, guttural snarls and the desperate, mournful sound of weeping. The spiritual disturbance caused by the exhumation has left the dead here without peace, forever trapped between a sacred space that was defiled and a new resting place that is not truly their own. The bustling streets of Newtown may be full of life, but St. Stephen's remains a silent, haunting reminder of the souls left behind. 9. St. John's Orphanage, former chapel, Goulburn, New South Wales. Built in 1912 and run by the Catholic Church, St. John's was a home for thousands of vulnerable children for over 70 years. The chapel was a place of ritual and devotion, but for many of the orphans, it was also a place of fear and punishment. The history here is deeply marred by reports of severe abuse and neglect, making the atmosphere of the entire site heavy with trauma. The orphanage closed its doors in 1978 and has stood derelict for decades, the decay perfectly mirroring the psychological anguish within. The suffering here wasn't quick or accidental, it was institutional and chronic. The emotional energy, the fear, the isolation, the sorrow of thousands of children, has simply become trapped within the building's fabric. The chapel, a focal point of their daily lives, is one of the most concentrated areas of this negative energy. The entire site is constantly active, but the former chapel has its own unique, heartbreaking phenomena. The most frequently reported encounter is the overwhelming, chilling sound of children's weeping and coughing that seems to emanate from the walls, often morphing into faint, terrified whispers. This is often linked to residual trauma from harsh discipline within the chapel space. Visitors also report seeing the translucent figure of a nun or caretaker standing at the altar or near the former pews, perhaps a residual echo of authority. But the scariest encounters belong to the children. People have reported objects being thrown by unseen hands, and a distinct sensation of being grabbed or pushed from behind by forces that feel small but shockingly strong. Perhaps most sadly, investigators have recorded EVP that sound like children calling for mummy or pleading to be let out. The chapel is not just haunted, it is a resonant chamber of historical, human sorrow, a place where the prayers of the innocent were overshadowed by the silence of their suffering. 8. Church of the Holy Innocents, Rossmore, New South Wales. Consecrated in 1848, this church was another vital community hub for the early settlers in this semi-rural area. The name Holy Innocents is traditionally associated with the biblical story of the children massacred by King Herod, a poignant choice that foreshadows the kind of heartbreaking sorrow the church would absorb. Its accompanying cemetery holds the remains of many original landholders and their families, having witnessed generations of life and death. The church and cemetery have simply accumulated a vast amount of life energy over its long history. While there is no single, devastating tragedy, the persistent human drama, of lives cut short, unexpected deaths, and the daily struggle of the past, has left a dense, residual imprint on the site. The Church of the Holy Innocents is known for its distinctly old-fashioned and subtle hauntings. One of the most common reports is of a single, chiming bell heard ringing softly at odd hours, even though the physical bell is securely tied or the church is locked. This is thought to be the residual sound of a long-ago service or a spiritual call to worship. Within the cemetery, however, the encounters become more visual. The most frequent apparition is a figure of a man dressed in old-style colonial attire, usually seen sitting quietly on a specific bench near the oldest graves, sometimes holding his head in his hands. He is a residual energy, seeming to be eternally contemplating his life or loss. More frighteningly, people who visit the church at night report seeing sudden flashes of light near the oldest gravestones, sometimes accompanied by a feeling of profound fear or being aggressively watched. The spirits here are generally quiet, but their presence is unmistakable, making this a true portal to the 19th century colonial past. 7. St. James Church, Sydney, New South Wales. Consecrated in 1824, St. James is one of the oldest and most significant churches in Australia, initially intended to be a courthouse. Its history is tied directly to the earliest days of the colony. The crypt, built beneath the main sanctuary, was used for burials, a common practice in the 19th century. Many of the burials were tragically young children, victims of the harsh colonial life and the diseases of the time. The crypt became known as the Children's Chapel due to the sheer number of infant and child remains interred there. The church has been lovingly maintained, but the intense concentration of historical sorrow in the underground crypt seems to have created a focus for the paranormal. The bodies were moved in the 1970s, a disturbance that often agitates spirits, but the lingering energy of the children who died here, denied a full life, has created a haunting that is both poignant and terrifying. The primary focus of the hauntings is the crypt itself. Visitors report an extreme and sudden drop in temperature, accompanied by the distinct sounds of weeping, coughing, and the faint, high-pitched sounds of children crying when the space is absolutely empty. The atmosphere is often described as thick with sorrow, making investigators feel physically ill or overwhelmed with grief. However, the activity can be more direct. People have reported seeing small, shadow figures, darting between the stone pillars. Perhaps the most spine-chilling personal encounter involves a sudden feeling of a tiny hand touching their leg or tugging at their clothes, sensations that instantly vanish when looked upon. These are not malicious ghosts, they are the tragically brief echoes of the children of the early colony, still waiting for comfort in their underground resting place, a chilling contrast to the vibrant city life above. 6. Shepherd Memorial Church of St. Peter, Proston, Queensland. The Shepherd Memorial Church was consecrated in 1937, built by the Shepherd family in loving memory of their son, Peter, who died at a young age. It was a heartfelt act of dedication, transforming personal grief into a lasting spiritual sanctuary for the small Proston community. For decades, it served its intended purpose, a place of baptism, marriage, and quiet worship, its rural setting adding to its tranquility. While the initial purpose was commemorative, the church seems to have attracted an older, sadder energy. The site itself, and the adjacent cemetery, contains the accumulated sorrow of a small, close-knit rural community where life was often hard and loss was frequent. The combination of a memorial to a lost son and the constant stream of funerals has created an atmosphere thick with unresolved grief. The church is primarily haunted by a pervasive atmosphere of sorrow and a gentle, female presence. Visitors frequently report a strong smell of lilac or old-fashioned rose perfume when no flowers are present, a scent often associated with an elderly woman or a lost bride. The most unnerving accounts involve the church's front entrance. People have reported seeing the faint, translucent figure of a woman in a long, dark dress standing just inside the entrance, as if waiting for a service to begin. She never moves or speaks, but her appearance is startlingly clear before she fades away. Even more chillingly, outside the church, late at night, some have reported seeing a small, spectral figure, possibly a young boy, playing briefly near the memorial sign before vanishing. This is often linked to the original young Peter Shepherd. The hauntings here are not malicious, they are merely the quiet, heartbreaking echoes of love and loss that refuse to leave this sacred, memorialized space. 5. St. Mark's Anglican Church, Picton, New South Wales. St. Mark's was consecrated in 1856, built to serve the burgeoning colonial settlement. The church, designed by renowned architect Edmund Blackett, became a cornerstone of community life. Its cemetery, filled with aged tombstones and towering trees, holds the final resting places of many of the town's early pioneers and their families. It was a place of reverence, quiet prayer, and sorrow, a witness to the full cycle of life in a hard-fought era. But the many tragedies that marked those early years seem to have left an indelible mark on the hallowed ground. The church and its cemetery have been absorbing the raw emotion of human suffering for over a century and a half. While there's no single catastrophic event that triggered the hauntings, the sheer density of personal tragedies, from mining accidents and disease to childhood deaths, has created a potent spiritual field. The combination of its age and the accumulated grief of a community has made St. Mark's a magnet for paranormal activity. The hauntings here are both deeply sorrowful and, at times, startling. The most commonly reported apparitions are those of children. Visitors have spotted the spectral figures of a young boy and girl, often dressed in old-fashioned clothes, appearing to hold hands and play among the tombstones, only to vanish into thin air. One famous photo, widely circulated, is believed to show the ghosts of two children who died decades apart: Blanche Moon, who was crushed to death in a tragic accident in 1886, and David Shaw, a young boy who died from polio in 1946. More subtle, but no less eerie, are the sensory hauntings. People have reported a sudden feeling of a dog licking their hand or a gentle nudge against their leg, only to find no animal is present. This is believed to be the spirit of a beloved black dog that was buried with its owner, a former pastor, and still wanders the grounds. Within the church itself, visitors have heard the disembodied sound of a single, soft hymn being sung in the empty nave, a sad echo of a service that has never truly ended. The spirits of St. Mark's are not malevolent, they are simply trapped in a time and place of profound sadness, forever tied to the stone and soil of this sacred ground. 4. Penitentiary Chapel, Hobart, Tasmania. This complex, originally built in 1831, was known as the Hobart Town Jail, one of the most notorious penal institutions in Australia. The chapel was central to the design, a space where convicts were marched daily, their individual cells essentially tiny prayer boxes, only allowing them to see the preacher and not each other. It was a place of forced contrition and control, a final spiritual stop for over 200 men who were executed on sight. The air here was heavy with fear, desperation, and finality. The chapel wasn't just a place of worship, it was the hub of the convict system. Every man who was sentenced to death or corporal punishment passed through or near this very spot. The gallows were literally part of the complex. When the site finally ceased operation as a jail and began its life as a historic museum, the intense emotions, the public humiliation, and the violent deaths simply refused to dissipate. The entire site is a beacon for paranormal activity, but the chapel itself, with its solemn rows and oppressive atmosphere, holds unique terrors. Perhaps the most famous is the sound of the Death March. Visitors and staff often report hearing the rhythmic, heavy footsteps of men marching in unison, sometimes accompanied by the clanking of chains, even though no one is moving in the complex. This is believed to be a residual haunting of the condemned walking their final path to the gallows. In the chapel's seating area, people often report a crushing sense of oppression and nausea, sometimes feeling physical contact, like an invisible hand pressing down on their shoulder. Investigators have recorded chilling EVPs here, including desperate pleas and ragged coughs. One consistent account involves a distinct, male voice that shouts, "Get out," during quiet investigation periods, suggesting a particularly territorial or angry former inmate. The chapel is a testament to the fact that when justice is cruel, the souls it condemns may never be fully released. 3. St. John's Church, Kapunda, South Australia. Kapunda was a boom town, home to Australia's first major copper mine. St. John's Church, built in 1863, was an essential pillar of this thriving community, ministering to the area's growing population. Its adjacent cemetery became the final resting place for hundreds of colonists, many of whom led short, hard lives marked by mining accidents, disease, and the struggles of colonial existence. The church stood tall until the 1930s, when it was tragically destroyed by fire, leaving behind only the cemetery and the poignant memory of its stone walls. The fire that consumed the church in 1937 seems to have been the catalyst for the paranormal activity. The destruction of a sacred space can often trap or release energies, and in this case, the spirits of the cemetery's residents seemed to become more active and less bound to their graves. The focus shifted from a living congregation to a restless community of the dead, agitated by the desecration. The most commonly reported apparition is a figure known as the Watcher or the Graveyard Gardener, a man dressed in period clothing who is often seen tending to the graves in the early morning or late afternoon. He is generally considered benign, a residual spirit going about his eternal routine. More unnerving, however, are the encounters linked to the children's section of the cemetery. Visitors have reported hearing the faint sounds of children giggling and playing, only for the sounds to abruptly cease when approached. People have also experienced sudden, intense bouts of crying or sadness in this area. Perhaps the most spine-chilling details are tied to a particular grave. A number of visitors have reported seeing a shimmering, translucent outline of a small dog that appears near a child's tombstone and then vanishes, suggesting a faithful companion still keeping watch. The feeling here is not one of malice, but of deep, aching sorrow, a profound sense of loss that hangs perpetually over the grounds. 2. Old Tailem Town, Wesley Church, Tailem Bend, South Australia. Unlike many of the grand stone churches, Wosley is a classic example of a simple country place of worship. It was originally built in the nearby town of Wosley in 1891, a vital social and spiritual hub for a small farming community. It served as a place for births, marriages, and deaths for generations. Its history is one of simple devotion until the church was saved from demolition and relocated, timber by timber, to its new home in Old Tailem Town to preserve its history. The relocation itself seems to have stirred something within the old timber and stone. While the church itself wasn't the site of any major tragedy, the act of dismantling and reassembling a sacred place of rest seems to have brought forward the energies of those who worshipped there. Now, within the context of the entire Ghost Town Museum, the Wesley Church stands out as a particular magnet for the unexplained, attracting a chilling focus from the town's unseen residents. The Wesley Church is primarily haunted by residual energy and, more disturbingly, a spectral choir. Visitors and staff have reported hearing the clear, albeit faint, sound of hymns being sung when the building is entirely empty, the harmony fading away when investigated. This suggests the residual echoes of long-ago services. However, the most chilling and personal encounter often centers on the church's piano. People who have sat on the piano stool to play a tune report a sudden, dramatic drop in temperature, followed by a profound sense of being watched or, even worse, being pushed off the stool. Paranormal investigations frequently pick up electronic voice phenomena, or EVP, specifically in the church. These include muffled voices that sound like a congregation murmuring prayers, and sometimes, a distinct, childlike whisper. The spiritual serenity of a church here is often broken by the undeniable feeling that you are intruding on a service that is still very much in progress. 1. St. Bartholomew's Anglican Church and Cemetery, Prospect, New South Wales. The story begins in 1841 when this Gothic revival church was consecrated, built on land donated by William Lawson, a key figure in the first successful crossing of the Blue Mountains. It was a center of faith and community for early colonists, its accompanying cemetery becoming the final resting place for generations, including several prominent colonial families. It was a place of solemn reverence, a testament to faith enduring in a harsh new land. But soon, tragedy would intertwine with its tranquility. St. Bartholomew's has suffered a series of devastating blows that seem to have anchored a pall of misfortune. The first major turning point came in 1970 when the church was ravaged by a fire that destroyed the roof and much of the interior. Then, even more eerily, it was hit by another fire in the mid-1990s, completely gutting the structure. This double tragedy seems to have unlocked a portal to the past, turning a quiet graveyard into a hotspot of paranormal activity. The chilling encounters here are varied and often violent. The most infamous and frequently reported apparition is that of Elizabeth Bessie Lawson, the wife of William Lawson. Visitors and paranormal investigators report seeing her spectral figure, a woman in white, either floating among the graves or standing forlornly near the ruins of the chancel. But Bessie is often just the beginning. People report feeling a distinct, suffocating sense of negative energy upon entering the cemetery grounds. There are reports of shadow figures darting between the tombstones, and disembodied whispers that seem to follow you from grave to grave. Perhaps the most terrifying encounters are with a distinctly malevolent presence, often described as an angry man. People have been scratched, pushed, and have heard guttural growls emanating from empty space. The belief is that the multiple tragedies and the disturbance of the graves, which have been subjected to vandalism over the years, have agitated the dead, leaving St. Bartholomew's a beautiful ruin haunted by the souls who can find no rest.